Hi, and welcome back to the official podcast of the WCD. There's a World Congress of Dermatology which will be held next in Singapore in 2023. I'm Dr. Etienne Wang from the National Skin Centre of Singapore, and I will be your host for this podcast. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, and wherever else you get your podcasts. In this podcast, I speak with dermatologists and skin researchers from all over the world to talk about all things dermatology. And before we start, I would like to remind you that registration and abstract submissions are open for the WCD, and you can use the links in the description to submit your abstracts. And today, Sashen is back with a derm topic for discussion. Hi Sashen, how are you?
Hi Dr. Etienne, doing well and nice to be back again.
What are we talking about today?
Well, it's just been Oscar season, so I thought we'd talk about some awards in dermatology. So the Allergen of the Year is an annual award that the American Contact Dermatitis Society gives. They choose an allergen for every year, and it's actually designed to draw attention to allergens that are very either common, under-recognized, or need more attention because of how they're causing significant allergic contact dermatitis. And the allergen for 2022 was something very ubiquitous, aluminium.
Aluminium, or as the Brits call it, aluminium. And I think it's very topical now also because of all the vaccines people are getting. I believe aluminium is aluminium is an adjuvant in a lot of vaccines, isn't it?
Yes, it is. In fact, a lot of studies first found aluminium allergies through studying patients who had vaccines containing aluminium.
Okay, such as?
So I think the Tdap in Sweden, there were some studies where they had looked at children, and I think some of the most common manifestations of aluminium sensitivity were as subcutaneous nodules and eczematous plaques. So vaccines, for example, containing aluminium salts, they had found it. So in the 1980s, there were some articles reporting aluminium allergy that were unrelated to vaccines. But there have been some reports, mainly from Sweden, from the 1990s on cutaneous eruption from aluminium-containing vaccines. So hundreds of kids got the newer aluminium-absorbed diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis vaccines in the 1990s, after which they developed itching subcutaneous nodules at the injection sites. So they did patch testing in about almost 500 children with these subcutaneous nodules using aluminium in petrolatum and an empty fin chamber. And 77% of these kids had a demonstrated aluminium allergy.
What else is aluminium found in?
For starters, food. So certain foods are known to contain aluminium, so fruits and vegetables, but not just food, but even wrappers. So aluminium foil, which we have in our kitchen cabinets, is known to contain aluminium.
Oh, does that leach into food?
In small quantities, but it's not really from consuming the food that's wrapped in aluminium foil, but rather consuming certain food types which naturally contain food. So, for example, tea leaves, mushrooms, spinach, radish, they're known to be more likely to absorb and accumulate aluminium than other foods based on some sources. But fruits, vegetables, meat, fish, and even grains and dairy is known to contain small amounts of aluminium naturally.
Oh, wow. Okay. I know we use of aluminium in our dry claw, which we use for palmoplantar hyperhidrosis and hemostasis sometimes.
Yes, definitely. Medications are a big component of aluminium-containing products as well.
And is aluminium in our standard patch test series?
From what I know, it's not in the standard patch test. Interestingly, a lot of these studies said that rather than testing elemental aluminium neat, it should always be patch tested compounded in petrolatum, making it a more sensitive marker.
And do you know whether they patch test to aluminium itself or a salt of aluminium?
So the patch test is supposed to be done with aluminium chloride hexahydrate, or ACH, that's compounded in petrolatum.
Okay, well, that is very useful to know, and I think we should all look out for these subcutaneous nodules from aluminium. I don't think I've seen any. Do you think you have?
I personally haven't. Looking at the literature, it was interesting that they also mentioned some sensitizing to aluminium, because the first reports of a possible sensitizer were in the 40s when they had the occupational contact dermatitis actually among aircraft workers. Wonder if it was actually during the World War time. There was also, antiperspirants, deodorants later on, astringents, elemental aluminium as well, which have been known to sensitize. But I personally haven't seen any patients yet.
Okay, very interesting, and I think we will all keep a lookout. Okay, thank you, Sashen, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you, and see you again.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
And now, I'd like to welcome to the podcast Professor Lee Haur Yueh. He's the head of the Dermatology Department at the Singapore General Hospital and the director of the Allergy Centre. He's also the president of the Dermatological Society of Singapore. Welcome, Haur Yueh, to the podcast.
Hi, Etienne.
How's your week been?
It's been great. A bit busy, but I think all of us are.
Yeah, so we're right in the middle of a pandemic, and one of your specialties is hospital dermatology. Can you tell us how that has affected your practice?
It has affected mainly in the way we assess patients. I think due to isolation of COVID patients. So one of the initiatives that we started in a hospital was to review patients' dermatology inpatient consultations via tele-dermatology. And that has worked out quite well.
Yes, and I noticed that you have a publication on teledermatology recently. How many patients do you see in teledermatology on average?
It varies. So in our inpatient teledermatology, we restrict these patients to mainly those who are COVID positive or are suspected of having COVID. So it really varies. Some days we would have one or two, and some days none.
And how do you get around the examination?
So what we've gotten is, to have the referral doctors to send multiple pictures to us, and it's a store and forward kind of a system. We'll review the patient's photographs and then provide treatment, and then we'll get them to send pictures, sequentially.
And a good thing that everyone has a 4K camera in their pockets these days. Yeah. Another part of your specialty is cutaneous drug reactions. Do you see a lot of patients with drug reactions from the COVID vaccine?
Yes, I think more and more, we do recognize quite a spectrum of cutaneous reaction from the various vaccines. And most of them are mild and benign. Usually they are not a contraindication to subsequent vaccination, but some of them are a little bit troublesome and requires a little bit of treatment and reassurance for these patients.
Do you actually do any testing for these patients or any investigations that you think these patients might need?
When the vaccination exercises first started and the reactions started coming in, we started off doing skin tests to PEG and to the vaccine. But we haven't found that extremely useful in predicting or confirming type 1 reaction, so we've kind of abandoned that from routine practice.
Yeah, it seems to be a very difficult thing to predict with a simple test.
Yeah.
Some of your other recent publications include melanoma, especially melanoma in Asian populations. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Actually, melanoma started off as a registrar project, and I think since then there has been some sort of a sustained interest in that, and we were looking at how the presentation of melanoma in Asians might differ from the Caucasian population, and I think, not surprisingly, a large proportion of them were acrolentigenous. But I think what was striking was that there was often a prolonged delay from the onset till it was picked up by a medical professional. And I think many reasons can account for that. These patients often, see many specialties before they end up with dermatologists. The feet is not an area that is routinely examined, by many professionals. And I think, there is perhaps an emphasis of sun exposure as pathogenesis. And while that is true, patients who are sensible under the sun, may think that they are not at risk, and they don't associate these pigmented lesions with being a melanoma.
What ways do you think you can increase public awareness of this condition?
I think that the first thing is really just education and being aware that, if there's anything that is pigmented on your palms and soles, then it's good to have them reviewed by a doctor. Yeah, and I think, even as medical professionals and dermatologists, I think it's in our complete skin examination, I think it's vital that we get, patients to remove their shoes and socks so that we can really expose and examine every single inch of the skin.
And much like the way we educate hairdressers to look out for AA and scarring alopecia, maybe we can get manicurists and podiatrists
exactly
involved too.
I think that's a great idea. I think
You also had a very interesting paper, I thought, about obstructive sleep apnea and melanoma incidence. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think, in OSA, we kind of know that it's no longer just a sleep issue, and we think that it's, with constant breaks in your sleep cycle, it's probably sets up a sort of an inflammatory milieu, and that probably sets the stage for many chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension. And I think one of our students wanted to see if there was a link between that and melanoma, and I think it was surprising and not so surprising that indeed there was a small risk attributed to OSA.
In the hypothesis you all mentioned about hypoxia and melanoma pathogenesis, do you see this in other hypoxic conditions like, let's say, COPD?
Not that I am aware, but I think part of the reason, I think there are two hypotheses. We don't know whether this intermittent hypoxia may play a role. Secondly, many OSA patients are a lot younger compared to, say, COPD. But I think we really don't know.
No, I thought it was a very interesting correlation. You're also the president of the Dermatological Society of Singapore. Do you have any events coming up that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, we'll be holding our 50th anniversary celebration later this year in conjunction with our annual scientific meeting.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been 50 years. That's amazing.
50 years of dermatology in Singapore.
Yeah.
That's a big milestone.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and such a coincidence that we're celebrating with the WCD next year as well.
Yeah. So I think it's really a coming of age for the society.
Does the DSS have any plans for any events around the WCD?
Yeah, I think we are planning to have our own dinners and events, but I think, we are planning all of these, round all of the measures, and hopefully things will ease up a little bit, and we'll be able to have a bit more fun and enjoy each other's company face to face.
Yes, after a long, long time.
Yeah.
Here's looking towards in-person WCD.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Haur Yueh, for sharing with us today.
Thanks, Etienne. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Okay,
bye.
thanks, Etienne.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the official podcast of the WCD. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram at WCD Singapore, and check out the WCD website, wcd2023singapore.org, for more updates and content on the WCD. At that website, you can find links to register for the WCD and submit your abstracts for next year's WCD. And until next time, stay safe and use sunblock.